I've heard some things about global debt forgiveness. Can you explain what that is? How likely is it to work? And anything else you want to say about it?
So, global debt forgiveness, yes or no? No. That's not to say that the debt will all be repaid. It won't be. And some people will be able to walk away from debt. Some people will escape from the clutches of anyone who might be coming after them. You can't pay it all back. There's simply no way. So we don't really know where the losses will lie, where the consequences of indebtedness will lie. Bailouts are never for the little guy, though, not ever. So there isn't going to be some intentional jubilee where we suddenly let everyone off the hook, or give every family $50,000 and just say, spend it any way you want. That just has never happened. That's not the way bailouts ever work. So I think the odds of that are basically nil. We may see more bailouts for the bigger players, but I think even that era is probably coming to an end. The bailout era has been allowing the big players to cash out while the system was still tottering along. Now I think the system's going to fall flat on its face, but a lot of the big players have done what they could to cash out already. The ones that haven't, because they were too addicted to playing the game, are probably going to lose it all when someone does the equivalent of yelling fire in a theater and you move into that market cascade. A lot of people who currently have an awful lot of money are going to lose it. Now, the consequences of debt will be really unevenly spread. So we don't really know who's going to get hit with the consequences. So there are many things that have happened in the past that were not so nice consequences of indebtedness that we're likely to see come back again, like indentured servitude and being strong-armed into the military, or debtors' prisons. We've already seen cases where credit card companies take people to court for a court order to pay the debt. Then when you can't pay, you're in contempt of court and they jail you for that. Not for a long time, but enough to frighten you. So they're using strong-arm tactics that are starting to look like debtor's prison, the beginning thereof. Right now, there are civilized means to get out from under unrepayable debt, bankruptcy. But when a trickle becomes a flood, the door will shut. It's already shutting. They're already making it harder for people to access civilized bankruptcy. So walking away from the consequences of debt will be harder. The other thing that happens with debt, if somebody thinks, a creditor thinks that they really don't have much of a chance of getting the money out of you, what they can do is settle for, say, 50% of it by selling the right to claim all of it to somebody else for 50 cents on the dollar, or any other amount that they choose. But if they sell the right to collect your debt to someone else, that party pays 50% of what you owed. Now they have the right to collect 100% of it from you. And the 50 cents on the dollar sort of roughly reflects their odds of success of doing that. They probably aren't going to get it all, but they don't have to succeed all the time. They only have to succeed 50% of the time, for instance. And they usually reckon their odds are better because they're prepared to be more aggressive with you than the original creditor was. Now, this can happen multiple times until your debt gets sold to Vinny the kneecapper for 2 cents on the dollar. You know, so debt collection can become really aggressive and unconscionable and illegal, quite frankly. They can do things that really are not very nice at all. And there have already been instances where people didn't really have anything that could be repossessed. So the debt collectors just break in, take everything out of their house and burn it in the front yard just to punish them. So some people will be able to walk away, some people will get away with it. Other people will find that there are consequences of debt. So I tell people to get out from under debt if you possibly can, because it's just one less thing to worry about. You can sleep at night more so anyway, if you're not exposed to the potential consequences. Otherwise, you never really know. You might be one of the lucky ones, but you might not. And that is something to bear in mind, really. I think people aren't really aware of the consequences of debt that have unfolded in the past, and they have been significant. You know, I mean, we are going to lose our energy slaves. We might just need some indentured servants to replace them, and then you lose your freedom. And you know, if somebody has leverage over your life, this is not a good thing. And it really worries me in relation to young people who are already being told, well, you know, all this student debt, well, we'll give you this lovely big signing bonus if you go and fight our resource wars in Iraq. You don't want to have that kind of leverage over your life. You really don't. And especially if you're young and you haven't really got a foothold in anything yet. So I worry about the consequences of debt. When I tell people to get out of it, I don't necessarily mean pay it back, although some people, by all means, pay it back if you can. For some people, they can't. It's just not possible. So then it's how do you get out from under it? If you're going to declare bankruptcy at some point, do it now while it's still available. A lot of this was predatory lending. It's never going to be repaid. But if you're going to walk away from something like that, do it while the consequences of doing so are not that severe. Yes, you will trash your credit rating if you do that. Credit's going away anyway. At some point, it's not going to make any difference. So try to insulate yourself. And some people have a problem with that. They would say, well, no, but debt is an obligation. You take on this debt, you really must pay. There's a lot of predatory lending out there. A lot of lending was made by people in a perfect position to know that this was never going to be repayable. They did it because they got fees anyway. They sold the risk onto Wall Street. They didn't care whether it was going to be defaulted on. Are we going to hold the little guy to higher standards of accountability than we hold the most powerful people in the country who are in the best position to know that what they were doing was stupid and predatory and wrong? So I would like to see the little guy get protected wherever possible, and the system is not going to do it. So the only way we can protect the little guy is to do it ourselves, to look after ourselves, understand the system, know what we can and cannot do within the system. And I just would like to see little guys not exposed to more risks than they have to be.
You talk about debt. I think of my kids who are in their 30s and have mortgages. I'm thinking, okay, what advice do you should I be giving them?
So children in their 30s with mortgages, what do we do? Well, do they have student debt as well? No. If they don't have student debt, that's a help. You can't declare bankruptcy over student debt, so they keep you on the hook forever. You are under the thumb on student debt. That's why I tell people, do not go there. With mortgage debt, often the best way out is to sell the property. Especially, I mean, if someone's in their 30s, chances are they haven't been paying for that long. They may not have that much equity, so they'd be underwater quite quickly. Now, I think Michigan is a non-recourse state. It varies by state. Recourse states are places where you can walk away, jingle mail, and then if you're underwater and the bank sells the house for less than it's worth, it's their problem, not yours. In most places, in Canada and Europe, they will come after you for the difference. And I think in Wisconsin, they'll come after you for the difference. Different states are recourse or non-recourse. I think here is non-recourse. You can either walk away if you're underwater, or you can try and sell if there's any equity that you might be able to cash out. But one thing I would consider doing before you do any of that is to say to the lender, show me the note, prove to me, show me the paperwork that says I owe you this money. Sometimes they can't. Sometimes you get a free house. So they made so many mistakes with paperwork in the whole securitization process. They can't always show you the paperwork. It's worth a try. You never know.
Show me the note, and if they don't have it, then
You don't owe it.
Yeah, if they can't legally prove that you owe them the money, you might just get a free house out of it. Now, they were trying to make up for the lack of paperwork with robo-signers, trying to fraudulently, after the fact, create the paperwork, because they broke the chain of title for almost all the properties in the country through mortgage securitization. This is a giant question mark, a sort of black swan, if you like, for how some of these things might play out, because it hasn't really been decided definitively in the courts whether fraudulent mortgages will be enforced against people. If they're not, the banking system will crash and people will be mad because they're going to lose their savings. It'll happen anyway. But if those mortgages are enforced, people are going to be up in arms saying, you know, this was a fraudulent system and now you're forcing us to pay it back. Different lower courts have gone different ways. We haven't seen anything come down from on high. Personally, I'd be incredibly surprised if they sided with the ordinary people. But some people may be able to get away with it in the meantime. Some people already have, because banks really were sloppy with their due diligence, sloppy with their paperwork, and sometimes people can capitalize on that. But other than that, then selling, cashing out equity, renting in the meantime, keeping your powder dry so that you've got your choices, your pile of choices for later on. You can get out from under debt, you can have cash if you're renting. So that tends to be a more secure position to be in. It can be an awfully hard sell to a bunch of 30-year-olds, though. So they're not necessarily going to believe you that there's anything to worry about. And they may be really emotionally invested in wherever it is they live. They may think that renting is for second-class citizens, for instance. That's a pretty common opinion. You know, why would you rent if you could own? People would say, well, the mortgage payment is less than the rent. Forgetting, of course, all the other costs of ownership, you know, all the taxes and the repair bills and the fact that the minute you own the thing, it starts to depreciate in value and you're going to be building up bills for the future. The cost of owning is actually way more significant than people typically think. But they're not comparing apples with apples when they compare the mortgage payment with a rent. Now, rents do take longer to fall. Rents will fall in a deflation, but they take a little while. They lag the fall in property prices. So for a while, renting can look kind of expensive, but in the longer run, when you really get into a property price collapse, the property will probably be losing more in value every month than your rent would have been to rent something else. So it's really not a bad bet, but it is a hard sell. That's going to be difficult. So you might be able to get them to listen. They usually don't listen to their mothers. So you might have to expose them to analysis by other people, and you know, there's quite a lot out there that you can get them reading. Zero Hedge might frighten them a little bit, and certainly the sort of stuff that we put up, and you know, things like Dmitry Orlov, Jim Kunstler. There are lots of people writing in this field who are offering parts of the big picture, reasons why you might want to be concerned. Our DVDs will be available hopefully fairly soon. Not being a filmmaker, I have no idea what's involved in post-production, so I don't know how long it takes, but I think it's supposed to be in the not too distant future that these will be available. So maybe they'll listen to people who aren't their mothers. No, my kids kind of listen to me, but they've been a captive audience since they were this big. So they've heard it and heard it and heard it. So, but the rest of my family doesn't listen to me. So it happens to everybody. You know, there's just this, well, who the hell are you and what would you know type thing that goes on. So familiarity breeds contempt, unfortunately. But there is information out there, and if you can bring it to their attention, maybe they'll take some of it in. But unfortunately, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. So sometimes there are going to be consequences that they can't avoid. Then you might start to think about, okay, if the worst comes to the worst and they end up foreclosed on, can I look after them in some way? Do my resources stretch to be able to cover them too? Is there any way I can bring them into a broader family structure, pool resources across the generations? So that can work. And I imagine there are an awful lot of mothers who are thinking, it's my lifelong duty to look after my kids, and if they fall flat on their faces, if there's anything I can do about it, I will. So I think there'll be a lot of people who are taking that approach, and if you're thinking about being able to look after not just, say, you and a partner, but the broader family as well, that's probably not a bad bet too.
Yeah, Nicole, one point in the slide sort of caught my attention was the, you know, you flip the switch and the electricity may or may not come on, right? So I'm wondering if you could maybe paint a little bit more of a picture, because what I'm hearing is that the catalyst for that is probably going to be economic, right? It's going to be financial, as opposed to we run out of coal or we run out of, right, the resource. So I'm wondering if you could just maybe connect the dots a little bit about how we would get from here, tell the story, the bedtime story, right? How we are today, and next week, you know, that light doesn't come on. I think that's going to be a pretty dramatic wake-up call.
It's interesting to look at what happened in Russia. It was a little different because you didn't really have utility bills in quite the same way. But when they had their collapse, basically everything froze up and there was no movement of money anymore. And you ended up in a scenario where nobody who produced power was getting paid, and so they were having to try to run stuff constantly with no money themselves for maintenance and repairing infrastructure. They were running out of money to even buy fuel to put in these plants. There was one interesting story where the Kola nuclear power plant tried to cut off the Murmansk nuclear submarine base because it never paid its bills. The tanks were on the doorstep in no time at all. And of course the base commanders were saying, do you want our nuclear reactors to melt down? You know, because there's no power. You know. So bad things can happen there too. That sort of thing. We're not likely to see tanks in the streets. But in terms of seizing up the ability to move money around, when money is keeping the system going, if people aren't paying their bills, then you can't pay the costs of running the system. So for a while you may be able to keep it going. Your infrastructure will last a while with no maintenance, or your power plants will last a while without being taken down for maintenance, but they don't last forever. It just gets much more difficult when you're experiencing an economic seizure where there's no money circulating in the system, in a system that is absolutely based on flows of money all the time, much more than Russia was. So, you know, in Russia, where they didn't have as much dependency on money, things lasted a lot longer. One of our major vulnerabilities is money changes hands for almost everything, and we end up with problems if it doesn't. If you can't buy the fuel, well, you can't produce the power because nobody can afford to buy the power. So you end up with problems really quickly. There will eventually be real resource limits that we hit, and the one that I think is going to hit first is actually going to be natural gas. So we have built a ton of natural gas infrastructure in the last 10 years. There's the promise of 100 years worth of shale gas. Nothing to worry about. Conventional natural gas peaked in 2001, has been declining ever since. Unconventional natural gas, like shale gas, has a really, really low net energy. You have to put in almost as much energy as you get out. It really is a mirage. And there are so many problems. These wells deplete really quickly. You're constantly on a drilling treadmill. You're drilling more and more and more for less and less and less. These things contract to small sweet spots out of a field. You don't know where they are till you've drilled everywhere. Lots of dry holes, tons of cost up front before you even get anything. So low energy return on energy invested makes for major problems. Because the hype has dropped natural gas prices so far, because people think we're swimming in it, all of it's being produced uneconomically. The companies that are doing it are losing money. They're building up massive amounts of debt. They're taking huge financial risk. They're trying to get through this period where the prices are low, but the hype is just keeping those prices low for now. So these companies could well go out of business. Your perception that you're swimming in the stuff is setting you up for a supply collapse. Because we haven't got 100 years of shale gas, we might have 5. One of the interesting dynamics with shale gas is if you can hype up the value enough, say you have a nice land lease on a chunk of land in a shale gas province, and you can convince somebody, oh, this is really worth a lot of money. You might be able to sell it for 10 times what you paid for it. It's a real estate bubble. It's just another form of real estate bubble. They explicitly say that they are doing this for the value of the land leases. And the New York Times had some really interesting correspondence that had, private correspondence among people in the industry that had turned up on their doorstep somehow. That was all about, well, these suckers, they obviously don't have the faintest idea that no one's ever going to get any gas off this, but we'll flog it off to somebody anyway. You know, this sort of thing. It was quite eye-opening. I wrote some pieces on that. I wrote one on the side of the dangers of fracking, and one on the natural gas bubble earlier this year. I forget exactly when, but it's in our primers, our updated primer guide anyway. So we're not swimming in the stuff. We're going to find we don't have very much natural gas. We're very dependent on that for heat and for power in a lot of places. So we could see price spikes in natural gas really quite soon. And then it's, heavens, what on earth else do we have? Well, it'll be coal, but there are tremendous disadvantages to using a whole lot of coal too. And so I think we're going to see a lot more consequences, environmental consequences, manifest from making choices like that. So it's definitely the financial system that is your initial limiting factor, but down the line there are going to be very important, very real resource limits as well.
Good.
Thank you very much, Nicole.
You're welcome.